Welcome to 7:30. I'm Tracy Bowden, sitting in for Lee Sales, who's ill. The fire in northwestern New South Wales is dramatic and aggressive. Burning across a 100-kilometre front, it's devoured dozens of homes, with residents fleeing its rapid advance. More than 100 have been forced to leave, taking refuge in Coonabarabran. The state's Rural Fire Service says it's a miracle no lives have been lost. Tonight, the fires in the Warrumbungle National Park are still burning out of control. Tens of thousands of hectares are now just blackened earth, and people's homes and livelihoods are still under threat. Residents in nearby Boogaldi have been told to leave as the fire bears down on their small town. I spoke a short time ago to Warrumbungle Shire Council Mayor Peter Shinton. Peter Shinton, the fire in your region is being called one of the most frightening of the summer. How would you describe what's been happening there?
Look, I'd agree with that statement totally. When we saw the massive cloud that went up yesterday afternoon, we realised that all hell must have been letting loose underneath. And this morning, after a reconnaissance trip around the fire perimeter, the things we've seen are quite horrific. From houses that have been totally destroyed, houses that haven't been destroyed. I mean, everyone evacuated, so it was up to the gods, and some made it, some didn't. We saw livestock dead and suffering in the paddocks, and they've all been fixed now. We also saw kangaroos in piles in the middle of the road, where they've come down the middle of the road and have just been baked alive because the fire was both sides. So it's horrendous, the scenery.
You know this area very well, and you know the people very well, and you've been speaking to the people today. How difficult has that been?
Very. I went down to the evacuation centre just a while ago, and people just want to know, is my house okay or is my house gone? And I was able to list to that. Other people want to know what the condition of their livestock was, and unfortunately that's where I've been the last couple of minutes, consoling a woman about that.
So can I ask, what was the news that you had to give her?
All dead. Yep.
So how does the community cope at a time like this? What sense do you have of the community feeling?
Well, there'll be nobody staying in the evacuation centre. I know that for a fact. Everybody has been billeted out to somebody or just to their friends. So the only reason they're getting together there tonight is to just console one another and talk about the events last night and what's happened during the day. But it's a horrendous sight. There's trees just completely burnt out. The Observatory survived pretty well. We had all of the scientific buildings seem to be intact, but the lodge and a couple of outer buildings, they've been destroyed. But no, the whole thing, we've been very lucky that has survived.
Given how aggressive this fire is, and obviously there is significant property loss too, but to some extent, do you think it could have been so much worse?
Well, it could have been. What we haven't suffered is loss of life, and it's because of the way the Rural Fire Service handled this today and yesterday, with text messages going out to everybody, even in areas where you don't have mobile coverage. These text messages seem to get through, and so everyone has been given ample warning, and people have been evacuated into town, and like I say, very few would be left in the evacuation centre.
And what are the authorities telling you about fire conditions and weather conditions in the days ahead?
Well, if we get and we probably will get a wind change tonight, that'll push the fire back onto parts that are unburnt. So and probably give it a new front. So and I know for a fact that one fire has jumped the Newell Highway, and that'll start to impact on people to the east of Coonabarabran. So that's going to be another episode tomorrow.
Were you taken by surprise?
I think so, because I've lived here for a number of years, and our first Section 44 fire was in 1997. I thought that was bad, but that didn't impact on houses very much or people. This has, and the people have rallied incredibly well. Just at the evacuation centre, which is the bowling club, people are settling down, having a drink, and just consoling one another, which is good to see.
But no doubt tough times ahead, and some busy times for you too.
Most definitely, I might have to don those yellow uniforms tomorrow and get stuck in myself, I think.
Well, Peter Shinton, thank you very much for speaking to us on what I know has been a very busy and a very stressful day for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Well, astonishingly, the Siding Spring Observatory, part of the Australian National University and one of the most important sets of space telescopes in Australia, appears to have escaped the worst as the fires raged. The outbuildings have been destroyed, but the telescopes themselves look at this stage at least relatively unscathed. Watching the fires advance online, thanks to some new remote access cameras installed at the observatory, was the ANU's Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist, Professor Brian Schmidt. Famously agnostic, Professor Schmidt joked in a tweet after the fire had passed, "Perhaps there is a God after all." I spoke to him earlier before he boarded a plane for a conference overseas. Professor Schmidt, I understand you were watching live online as the fire raced through the observatory. What was that like? You must have been extremely anxious.
Yeah, we have this new technology where all of our telescopes in the observatory are linked up through the internet, and so we could literally watch second by second as the smoke came in and then the fires, and watch the temperature rise, and so it was very anxious. I have to admit, I'm not sure if I like all this kind of activity. I think I would have just preferred to wake up in the morning to find out what was going on.
Can you paint me a picture of what you were seeing as you watched online?
Well, you know, it kind of caught us by surprise because this fire started very quickly. And I was first alerted to it, looked at our all-sky camera, and we could see big black billowing clouds to the southwest. And then the sky just became very, very black, and at some point you couldn't see. And then I saw flames on the summit. I saw the temperature spike at over 100 degrees Celsius on the Anglo-Australian telescope, so I knew the fire had come through. And then I could see the smoke clear, and I was glad to see that the telescopes that were in this all-sky camera were still all there. But then I got a little scared because a couple hours later, as it became dark, the camera started showing that there were spot fires across the mountain, and we could tell that one of the big buildings, and it turned out to be the lodge, was clearly completely alight and burned to the ground.
So what do you know so far about the state of the telescopes as you have people on the ground there assessing the damage?
Various crews are going through and looking at the telescopes. I know the major telescopes are all okay. There will be damage presumably to various things, especially on the outside. I know there's been a lot of smoke, but it would appear that in general the telescopes have scathed unharmed. But we'll be off the air for several weeks, presumably, as they try to get power back to the site, water, sewage, and all those things. And of course, we don't have any place to stay up there right now either.
Professor, tell us a bit about this observatory. How important is it?
Siding Spring Observatory is sort of the nexus for optical astronomy. I'm an optical astronomer. So it houses 12 telescopes, and it's where essentially half of the astronomers in Australia are trained. And so it really is a huge facility that we really depend on to do our astronomical research here in Australia.
Why was this particular location chosen for the observatory?
So it really goes back to the 1960s when they were looking for a place to house the telescopes. And telescopes like to be on top of mountains, away from cities. And we could have stuck it in the middle of nowhere where it would have been very expensive. They decided instead to put it here on the edge of the Warrumbungles, which was relatively close to infrastructure, and so it was the most cost-effective place to put an observatory. And it has reasonably clear skies for Australia, and is up at roughly 1,100 meters, and so it's a good site.
In terms of the site's global significance, would scientists around the world have been watching to see what damage was being done?
Yeah, those 12 telescopes are not just Australian telescopes. They're telescopes from places around the world, and so many people's facilities were put at risk. And many people use the Australian facilities, which are the largest there. And so, yeah, it's very scary when you watch this happen, especially since we saw the consequences of what happened in 2003 at Mount Stromlo.
As you say, almost 10 years ago, Mount Stromlo was destroyed in the fires outside Canberra. Did you learn some lessons then that helped you protect this facility this time?
Absolutely. The fires in 2003 caused the observatory to undergo a huge range of activities to help prevent it from burning the ground. And I think one of the most important ones seems relatively minor, but is where I think Mount Stromlo came unstuck, was putting fire-resistant screens on every single window. And those clearly have done their job. But we also had paint that was fire resistant, getting rid of large numbers of trees that were scattered across the observatory, amongst other things. And so they seem to have done a much better job at protecting the observatory in this instance.
Professor Schmidt, thanks very much for speaking to us.
My pleasure.